Hello, I'm Sophia Besch, and this is The World Unpacked. Today, we're examining the fragile ceasefire in Gaza, its implications, challenges, and delays with implementation, and the evolving role of the United States in the region under President Donald Trump's administration. After over a year of devastating conflict, Israel and Hamas reached a three-phase ceasefire agreement in January 2025, brokered by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. The deal allowed for significant increases in humanitarian aid deliveries, prisoner and hostage exchanges, and discussions for a potential permanent ceasefire. We are recording this episode on March 11, 10 days after the scheduled completion of Phase 1. Since then, the ceasefire has remained in limbo. Israel is pushing to extend Phase 1, while Hamas wants to advance to Phase 2 negotiations under which a permanent ceasefire would be established. With talks stalled and violence continuing despite the ceasefire, the road ahead remains uncertain, especially as U.S. policy under President Trump continues to shift. Joining me today is my colleague Zaha Hassan, a fellow in Carnegie's Middle East program and a human rights lawyer. She previously served as the senior legal advisor to the Palestinian negotiating team during Palestine's bid for UN membership and is a regular participant in Track 2 peace efforts. Zaha, welcome.
Thank you.
Zaha, let's start with some context setting. Can you just talk us through the three phases of the ceasefire deal, where things currently stand? Was Phase 1 implemented as intended, and what would you say are the prospects for moving on to Phase 2?
So thanks for having me first. I appreciate it. So we had three phases as a part of the ceasefire agreement, and they were to last 6 weeks each. The first phase was to be prisoner and detainee exchanges. Then we were supposed to see the redeployment of Israeli troops, partial redeployment of Israeli troops, and humanitarian aid surged in, and a number of other steps that Israel was going to take. Some things were written on paper, and some things happened that must have been agreed between the negotiators and the parties. For example, we saw Qatari and Egyptian private security overseen by U.S. private security inside of Gaza, vetting Palestinians as they moved from the south back to their homes in the north, which was also part of the ceasefire agreement. We also saw ununiformed Palestinian Authority officials at the Rafah crossing stamping passports for people that were, going to Egypt, being allowed to leave so that they could get medical treatment, for example. So there were things that were on paper on the ceasefire agreement, and some things that were understandings. And for the most part, that 6-week period went off pretty good. There were some violations. 100 Palestinians were killed during this time in Gaza. And there was one rocket fired by Hamas during this period. But for the most part, what was on paper for the 6-week period occurred. What didn't happen during that 6-week period, which was negotiations were supposed to start around 2 weeks into that period, that would have set the stage for Phase 2. And Phase 2 of the agreement was more prisoner exchanges, an Israeli withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor, which is an area that runs along the border between Egypt and Gaza, where the Israeli troops remained during Phase 1, and a complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Now, Israel has already indicated they're not going to withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor, and they're only amenable to a prolonged ceasefire to allow for the some more prisoners to be exchanged. And now there's, I think, about 24 live Israeli hostages, but I think 59 total Israelis, if you count also those captives that have been killed. So that's what Israel's after. Hamas wants a wants a permanent ceasefire. And so that's what's holding things up. Now, if we can't get to a second phase, that means we can't get to a third. And the third phase is where we can start to see reconstruction in Gaza and people getting back into, homes and having a livable situation in Gaza. It's not livable at the moment, and people are just living on the ruins of their homes.
Yeah. Okay. Before we get into detail a bit more, I wanted to just ask you to explain to us, there are several alternatives or additional plans from countries in the Middle East for the future of Gaza that have been in the news recently that listeners might have seen. I'd like to ask you about two, the Arab plan for Gaza and the Egyptian plan for reconstruction. What are these plans? How significant are they to this current moment?
So the Arab plan is basically the Egyptian plan. It was adopted by the Arab League during its recent meeting. There was a summit held in Cairo, and all of the Arab governments, key stakeholders like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates all signed on to the Arab plan. It's also been endorsed by the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, by the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy. So it's got widespread support, and this plan is pretty good, I would say. Why do I think so? Well, if you think about what has been advanced by the United States recently, and if you think about some of the various plans that have been percolating and have some currency, this plan looks great, because these other plans basically try to sideline any Palestinian national body from governance, thus denying, Palestinians agency. And they also call for a multinational force or a multinational consortium of countries governing Gaza, or they call for the United States simply to take it over. And they call for foreign troops on the ground. So this is deeply problematic if we're hoping to get to a situation in which we can get a peace agreement between Israel and Palestinians. Because if you marginalize Palestinian national representation, it's really an erasure of Palestinians as a national group and really violates their right to self-determination, which is something that was recently affirmed by the International Court of Justice in July 2024, in its advisory opinion, calling on all states to support Palestinians' right to self-determination and calling on Israel to immediately withdraw its forces from occupied territories, finding that it's illegal for Israel to be present there and its settlements. So all these other plans really were about Gaza. They were focused on Gaza, but without really Palestinian-led governance or security, and really focused on Israel's security and focused on maintaining the status quo, which is not a livable situation for Palestinians. So that's why I say the Arab plan was a bit refreshing, because it focused on Palestinian governance. There would be an administrative committee of Palestinians from Gaza governing, but under the Palestinian Authority oversight. And there would be Palestinian police providing internal security. It called for UN peacekeepers to come in to maintain security for both Palestinians as well as Israelis. And it had an all of Palestine approach, and it referenced UN frameworks for development and reconstruction. So it was, it was very much centered on rights, centered on Palestinian agency, and supportive of multilateralism and UN institutions. Critically, it called for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency to be respected and allowed to do its work. It's an indispensable humanitarian relief agency for Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but throughout the Middle East, where Palestinian refugees are hosted. So this was really important. It also reasserted the primacy of the Palestine Liberation Organization as the political address for Palestinians, thus preserving the notion that you have an address, a political address for Palestinians for a peace agreement with Israel.
Okay, thank you. So one more question on substance, and then I would like to ask you about the political significance of the Arab plan in this current moment. But on substance, just to make sure listeners understand, you've talked about the Palestinian Authority's governance under this plan. Everybody will have heard about the political fragmentation between Gaza and the West Bank being a major obstacle to this objective. How does the plan address that obstacle?
Interestingly enough, I have not seen a plan, and there are so many. There are plans from, this Arab plan. There are plans from various think tanks. There are conversations being had in different foreign capitals about what should happen. But people don't really explain how you're going to have any kind of governance without input from Hamas or an agreement from Hamas that would allow for the Palestinian Authority to take over governance in Gaza. And I think this is a real sticking point. Obviously, you have to have an agreement from Hamas, otherwise you're going to have, resistance. And we're going to see continued violence. In particular, if you have a multinational consortium of countries and foreign troops inside Gaza, you're having occupation by another name. And it's going to be resisted in the same way Israel's occupation is resisted. And so there has to be an agreement between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. The good news is Hamas has signed a declaration with the Palestinian Authority faction, the ruling faction of the PA, Fatah, along with 12 other Palestinian factions, and it said it's willing to give up governance in Gaza if it is allowed to become part of the PLO. And so there is this understanding that Hamas would prefer to be part of the PLO than to govern Gaza. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to give up its weapons. There have been statements from various Hamas officials basically saying, well, the Palestinian Authority can't even maintain the security of its people in the West Bank. How can we trust it to come into Gaza and provide security for Palestinians there? So there would have to be some agreement on security for Palestinians in Gaza for Hamas to feel comfortable with the notion that it would not necessarily give up its arms, but at least put down its arms to allow for the reconstruction of Gaza and to allow for the Palestinian Authority to govern. So that needs to happen. That's going to take a lot of stakeholder engagement. I think it's possible. I think there is an incredible will at this moment, given the threats to the displacement of Palestinians, for the Arab governments to come together and to really put pressure on both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas to actually implement their previous agreements about allowing the Palestinian Authority back into Gaza. So there is this one event, I guess, of the last few days in which we learned that the White House envoy for hostage negotiations, Adam Baylor, met with Hamas officials in Qatar and learned that for himself in direct talks, something we haven't seen ever really, with a U.S. official and Hamas having open dialogue. Basically, Hamas has indicated to Mr. Baylor that they would be willing to give up governance.
Yeah, I want to make sure we talk about those US-Hamas talks in a little bit, but just, I guess, how do you assess the political prospects of this Arab plan right now? I mean, you've talked about the significant number of parties supporting it. You've sort of sketched out a path forward. What is the link between, I guess, the ceasefire that was brokered in this plan? How does the United States feel about the prospects of this plan? How does Israel feel about it? What do you think? How likely is it that we're going to get there?
Yeah. Yes, I might have painted a rosier picture of the Arab plan, or maybe given the impression that it's we're on the verge of something here. No, it's great in that you have a lot of consensus around important stakeholders, Arab stakeholders, European stakeholders. Hamas has agreed to it. The Palestinian Authority supports it. What you don't have is the United States support, and you don't have Israel support. Now, we're going to need the United States to support it in order to get Israel to support it, so that's important. Right now, what we have from what we've seen from the United States is a real hodgepodge of sort of policy positioning around the so-called day after in Gaza. We have, as I mentioned, Adam Baylor, a White House envoy, talking to Hamas and talking about maybe a future for Gaza that would involve Hamas staying, maybe not governing, maybe not, providing security inside of the Strip, but possibly being able to stay. And then you have statements from the president, obviously calling for, complete destruction and decimation of Hamas and the relocation, resettlement of Palestinians outside of Gaza. And then you have other officials, talking about, indicating some support for the president's vision, but at the same time, less clear about, how this is all going to happen, or whether or not they might be amenable to another plan. So I don't know if this is by design. We have a lot of, chefs in the kitchen right now. You've got Secretary of State. You've got two different White House envoys. You've got, National Security Council, all engaged on this issue. And so it's unclear whether people are just, each, putting down their opinions, or whether it's meant to confuse the situation, because we've seen this president, on various other issues, say one thing one day, and maybe a week later we see kind of not a retraction, but kind of a different positioning on the same issue. So it's not really clear. And maybe this is a president who's very much interested in being able to say he achieved Middle East peace. And he could be just sending out his representatives to try to test waters and see what might be possible. Because if one thing looks like it could be a successful avenue, he might pursue it and then be able to say, I did this, So it's not really clear yet. We have to wait and see, I think.
Okay, well, I think we've set the stage for understanding the ceasefire's fragile framework, the broader regional efforts to stabilize Gaza. We're going to take a short break now, and then I really want to dive into what, Zaha, you've just identified as the hodgepodge of U.S. positioning, and try to get you to help us understand what the different proposals we've seen from the White House may mean. We'll be right back.
This is George Perkovich. For 3 decades, the Carnegie Nuclear Policy Conference has helped government officials, journalists, NGOs, industry, scholars, and students to debate and understand the latest risks and possible pathways to managing them. This year's conference will be held on April 21 and 22. Registration is open, but seating is limited. For more information on the program and to register, go to carnegieendowment.org/NPC2025.
Thanks for listening to The World Unpacked from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. If you enjoy the show, make sure to check out other audio series and podcasts from Carnegie. Subscribe to Carnegie podcasts on popular podcast platforms such as iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Now back to the show. Okay, we're back with Zaha, Hassan. in February, during an Oval Office press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Trump suggested that Palestinians should be permanently relocated outside of the Gaza Strip. Is this new U.S. call for resettling Palestinians outside of Gaza serious? How do you assess it?
Yeah, I think it really took everyone aback when you heard a U.S. president essentially advocating for ethnic cleansing of a territory, of its people. This is a president who is known for his shock value, and many have referred to sort of this madman syndrome that sort of throws things out there, and it's meant to be a disruption of the status quo and meant to elicit creative thinking. Some have argued that it was meant to spur Arab stakeholders into presenting and putting together their own plan. It's unclear to me. This is a president who, in his first term, talked about resolving in a deal of the century the Israel-Palestine quote-unquote conflict, and came up with a plan that essentially allowed the status quo to become concretized and allowed Israel to take sovereignty over most of the West Bank. So he has a proclivity towards Israel that is very strong. And this is definitely a plan, the idea of forcing Palestinians out of Gaza because Gaza's become unlivable. This is an idea that came from Israel. I mean, this was something that was advanced by Israel's Ministry of Intelligence early on in October 2023. We started hearing about this as an option that was the best option. So that the president repeated it and made it sort of normal to talk about forcing Palestinians out. And I say forcing deliberately because there is no voluntary. If you allow Israel to continue to create conditions of life, allow it to deprive Palestinians of humanitarian assistance, they're completely dependent right now on getting water from outside, food from outside, medical supplies from outside. If you continue to deny those essentials of life, and the U.S. allows that to continue, then it's not a choice anymore. Of course, people are going to try to flee for food, for the safety of their children. So it is deeply troubling. But even if he never really meant it, even if it was just meant to spur Arab stakeholders to action, by just saying it, he's created now this kind of normalization. And, you see it in terms of the media reportage on it. Instead of talking about the illegality of this under international law and referencing it as ethnic cleansing, it's talked about as, a relocation, a humanitarian gesture by the U.S. president to make a better life for Palestinians elsewhere. So I think it's done a lot of damage already.
Yeah, I think that's really important to say. I want to, before we get into maybe the relationship between this administration and Israel, I wanted to ask you to unpack another strand of recent U.S. policy in the region, and we've already mentioned it in the first half of the show. It's been revealed that officials from the Trump administration held secret and direct talks with Hamas. This is a significant change in U.S. policy. It's sort of unimaginable, under the previous administration. I can't imagine the response they would have gotten had they done something like this from the Republicans. Why is the U.S. now talking directly to Hamas, and what broader implications do you think this could have?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I have to amplify what you said. Like, can you imagine this happening under a Biden administration? No. I mean, it would have been attacked. The Republicans would have attacked the Biden administration unbelievably if it had taken this position. But, similar to, Nixon going to China, this is sort of that kind of a moment. Maybe it takes the the side that is so vociferously opposed to something to make things happen, to make it okay for things to happen. I have to credit this administration for exploring this, because there is just no way you're going to see a day after in Gaza unless you can crack this puzzle of how do you deal with Hamas? Because Hamas is a resistance movement. Hamas isn't, it can't be defeated by, 2,000-pound bombs, the equivalent of 6 Hiroshima bombs being dropped on Gaza. It hasn't gotten rid of them in the last 16 months. So people knew this going into the post-October 7th world and Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Everyone knew you're not going to destroy and get rid of Hamas or any kind of Palestinian resistance this way. You have to be able to talk to the parties involved in a conflict in order to figure out how to end it. I mean, it's just 101, So it was surprising that this administration was making this contact. I think they learned something. I think it's very hard to rely on Israel's narrative of what Hamas wants and what Hamas will do and what it won't do. I mean, Israel has an agenda in Gaza, and it's diametrically opposed to things like international law and human rights. And so hearing exactly what Hamas wants directly from Hamas is an important step, I think, that this administration took. And I think from the reportage from Adam Baylor, it was clear to me that he was surprised about what he heard, about their willingness to relinquish governance, about their interest actually in, putting down their arms too. But they want a permanent ceasefire. They want a normal existence in Gaza for Palestinians. And they have, political asks as well. I mean, Hamas's, priority has been Jerusalem, for example, and Palestinian displacement in Jerusalem and in the rest of the West Bank. So these issues need to be addressed, and you've got to talk to the party that's holding things up on both sides, not just on one.
Okay, so this is maybe a counterintuitive question given all the support, really fairly unlimited support to Israel we've seen from this administration so far. But you have talked about the more creative approaches being deployed. We just heard about the meeting with Hamas, a break with U.S. policy there. You've also mentioned, and we've heard this from several people now, that one of the president's motivating objectives seems to be a Nobel Peace Prize or achieving peace in the region. If this administration, if the president does arrive at a point where he feels that Israel stands in the way of that, do you think that we could see more pressure on Israel from this current administration?
So this is a president who is very transactional about the way he conducts things. So he wants to get if he's going to give, and he's going to want to get big. And we've also seen this administration being willing to take some risks in terms of, conversating with Hamas officials. So I could possibly see a world in which this president, who doesn't necessarily have the best relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu, he appreciates Netanyahu's wife and has a good relationship with her, but he doesn't necessarily like Netanyahu too much. I could see him putting pressure on Netanyahu. In fact, we've already seen it. The fact that we got a ceasefire, this ceasefire deal that was implemented January 19th was a ceasefire that was negotiated back in May 2024 under the Biden administration. But the Biden administration wasn't willing to put any, force behind getting Israel to accept it. And it took President Trump pressuring Netanyahu to get it done. So I think, yes, I have much more hope that this administration will do what it takes to get to an agreement given the personality of this president and what he's already shown he's able to do.
Okay. Final question as we're nearing the end on the recent developments in the region. Our focus in this conversation has been primarily on Gaza. Can you talk to us about what is going on in the West Bank, what is going on the ground, and how does it fit into the conversation we've had and the contacts between Hamas and the US?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's been, since the ceasefire started between Hamas and Israel in January 19th, it almost seems as though there was this agreement between Netanyahu and his ultra right-wing coalition partners that as a price for the ceasefire, he would have to allow the settlers and the IDF to basically pursue ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. That became sort of the condition, it appears. Because immediately it was announced that there would be Israeli operations escalating in the West Bank. And then we saw attacks on 4 different refugee camps and complete depopulation of communities where 40,000 people have now been forced from their homes, and complete destruction of some refugee camps so that they can't return. So this really, I think, gives a lot of weight to the notion that you really can't have a ceasefire that applies to just one part of the occupied territories. We really do need a political settlement, and the ceasefire needs to apply to all of Palestine, and it needs to be linked to a political process that gets us to an end of occupation. And very important in that is establishing a UN-mandated peacekeeping force for Palestine. Palestinians have long asked for this. Almost in every resolution that they have advanced in the UN has asked for this. And it was repeated in the Arab plan as well. I think it's really critical now. I mean, we're in a moment where soon we'll have a decision from the International Court of Justice on whether or not genocide's being perpetrated against Palestinians in Gaza. We already have International Criminal Court arrest warrants out for the Israeli Prime Minister as well as the former defense minister. This is not, the hyperbolic talking points of Palestinian officials about what's taking place. This is, international legal experts are saying something is desperately wrong here. The violence has gotten to a level now where we're talking about genocide. This is not acceptable. And I think it's really important now for this long-held demand for peacekeepers to be pursued.
Zaha, thank you so much. This is the point of the show where I ask our guests if there's a book or a paper that they would recommend to our listeners to better understand the issue. I can only recommend your recent papers, including in Foreign Affairs, but what do you want to put forward?
Oh, I would love for people to pick up, and actually not pick up, you can download this edited book that I worked on with a group of amazing experts who were talking about sort of this connection between U.S. foreign policy and Israel-Palestine and how it's impacting our civil liberties in the United States. It's a very timely collection of essays on the subject, given what we've seen just in the last few days, where a Columbia student, former student, was picked up at his home by ICE officials and secreted off to a detention center, though he holds a green card, simply because of his activism while a student on pursuing a ceasefire in Gaza. So I think this book really, it was a product of a project over a year and a half, but we had anticipated these kinds of actions taking place even back when we started the project, which is why we wanted to write the book. So I would recommend that. It's called Suppressing Dissent: Shrinking Civic Space, Transnational Repression, and Palestine-Israel.
Yeah, very timely indeed. Zaha, it was a pleasure to have you on The World Unpacked. I look forward to having you back on the show in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have been listening to The World Unpacked, an audio production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Views expressed are those of the host and guest panelists and not necessarily those of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Subscribe to Carnegie podcasts on popular podcast platforms such as iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find our episodes on Carnegie's YouTube channel as well. Learn more at thecarnegieendowment.org. Thanks to the excellent Hyewon Park, who is our audio engineer and executive producer, and to Cameron Zotter, who is our videographer. I'm Sophia Besch, Senior Fellow in the Euro Program and host of The World Unpacked. Thanks for listening.